At my wedding, my parents called me a drama queen for crying when they seated my ex next to me. During my speech, I said, "At least he never called me embarrassing for having emotions." Everyone went quiet. Marcus and I were standing behind the reception table, wine glasses in hand. He had just finished his speech, a lovely one about love and second chances, and passed me the mic with a smile. My hands were trembling, not from nerves about public speaking, but from what had just happened an hour earlier. He whispered, "Just be honest. Say what you want to say." I gave him a small nod. Then I turned toward the crowd of people, family, friends, co-workers, and my ex-husband. My eyes lingered on my parents. They looked content, like hosts of a successful party. I wondered, for a second, how they thought this was okay. Then I took a breath and said into the mic, "At least he never called me embarrassing for having emotions." The room froze. 2 years ago, if you told me I'd get married again, I would have laughed bitterly. I was divorced, living in a rented apartment in Santa Rosa, and swearing off relationships altogether. My marriage to Darren had left me emotionally exhausted. On the outside, we were picture-perfect: good jobs, vacations, friends, a fixer-upper house with an open-concept kitchen. But behind closed doors, we were strangers. Darren wasn't violent or loud. That would have been easier to explain to people. He was silent, cool, dismissive. I cried often, sometimes from sadness, sometimes from confusion, sometimes from just feeling like I didn't exist in the room with him, and each time, he would just sigh and say, "Is this really necessary?" Sometimes he'd leave the room. Sometimes he'd say, "You always make everything about you." I started believing it. My parents, Marta and Leonard, weren't the comforting type either. They were both raised during hard times in rural Ohio, and emotions were considered weak, indulgent, or worse, attention-seeking. My mother once told me, after I cried at a cousin's funeral, "Let's not make it about us." That line stuck with me like a splinter under skin. So when Darren and I divorced, amicably on paper, it felt like failure. Not just of a marriage, but of everything I'd tried to hold together. But then I met Marcus. We met at a charity fundraiser my boss made me go, and I almost bailed. Marcus worked in nonprofit legal aid and didn't like talking about himself. I liked that. He asked questions. He listened. On our second date, I cried, half from nerves, half from telling a story about my late grandfather, and I waited for the eye roll, the sigh, the change in posture. It didn't come. Instead, he said, "Thanks for sharing that. I can see how much he meant to you." That night, I remember going home and crying again out of sheer relief. Marcus didn't fix me. He didn't save me. But he saw me. And that was enough to make me believe in the possibility of love again. We were engaged within a year. Planning the wedding felt like therapy and war at the same time. Marcus and I agreed early on, we wanted a small wedding. Around 60 people. Outdoors. No extended family we hadn't spoken to in years. No drama. No games. Just people who genuinely supported us. My parents, of course, had opinions. "You're not inviting Aunt Belinda?" My mom asked, appalled. "I haven't spoken to her in 5 years," I said. "She's family," she said, like that was a complete explanation. That phrase, "she's family," was a card my mother used like a trump suit in a rigged game. It didn't matter if someone was abusive, cold, toxic, or manipulative. If they were family, they were in. No questions asked. And in this case, that included Darren. Yes. Darren. 3 days before the wedding, as I was finalizing the guest list and place cards, I noticed his name, Darren W., in tiny, impersonal font on the Excel sheet my mother had emailed me with updates. I called her. Immediately. "Why is Darren on the list?" I asked, trying not to panic. "Oh, I thought it'd be nice," she said lightly. "We've stayed in touch. He's always been polite." "I haven't spoken to him in 2 years," I said. "But he was a big part of your life." He saw you grow up, in a way, she said. We don't have to erase people, Isla. My father chimed in from the background. It's just a seat at a table. I was stunned. I hung up after a tight, "We'll talk later." I told Marcus. He offered to speak to them for me. I declined. I told myself it wouldn't matter. Maybe Darren wouldn't show. I was wrong. The day of the wedding was perfect on the surface. Sunny skies. A breeze that made the vineyard trees dance just enough. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows went smoothly. I was glowing. Until dinner. I walked into the reception tent with Marcus, hand in hand. As we reached our table, my eyes landed on the place cards. To my left, Marcus. To my right, Darren. My stomach dropped. I looked around, thinking there had been some mistake. Then I saw my mother, seated nearby, raising a glass like everything was just fine. I turned to Natalia, my cousin and maid of honor, and whispered, "Is this a joke?" She just looked uncomfortable and said, "They said it was too late to change anything." I walked out of the tent. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I just cried quietly under a tree while the photographer kept snapping candids of other guests. Marcus found me. He held my hand. Kissed my temple. "I can ask him to leave," he offered. I shook my head. "It'll just make more noise." "Then what do you want to do?" he asked. I looked at him and said, "I want to say what I need to say." He nodded. That was how I ended up on that microphone, trembling, with 50 pairs of eyes on me and years of suppressed emotion crawling up my throat. My mother looked like she was biting the inside of her cheek. My father had that look he always got when someone got too emotional in public, thin lips, wide eyes, looking for the exit. Darren, for his part, looked uncomfortable for the first time that evening. He'd been charming everyone, laughing, shaking hands. But now, the room was too quiet. I hadn't meant to say it like that. I'd written a sweet, thoughtful speech. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was, "At least he never called me embarrassing for having emotions." It wasn't about defending Darren. God, no. It was about the unbearable fact that even he, my emotionally absent ex-husband, had never humiliated me for crying in public. But my parents? My own blood? On my wedding day? They still treated my feelings like a problem to be managed. The weight of that realization cracked me open. I continued speaking, but I didn't read from the notes. I spoke from somewhere deeper. The words poured out like they'd been living in me for years. I saw some guests shift in their seats, some exchanging glances, others just staring at their napkins like they suddenly became fascinating. A few people looked at Marcus, as if to ask silently, "Is she okay?" Marcus just reached for my hand under the table and gave it a light squeeze. "I've spent a long time," I continued, voice steadier now, "learning to be okay with how I feel. I used to think that crying meant I was weak, or making things about myself. I used to apologize every time I had an emotion stronger than mild amusement." I looked right at my parents. And I learned that from people who were supposed to teach me what love looks like. No one clapped. No one gasped. The air just got still. My mother's face was frozen in this weird half-smile, like she couldn't decide if she was supposed to look proud or mortified. My dad's arms were crossed, his body rigid, the way it got whenever something couldn't be fixed with logic or avoidance. I don't even remember how I ended the speech. I think I mumbled something like, "Thank you for being here," and walked away from the mic. I didn't cry. That part was done. The rest of the evening blurred together in fragments. I remember the music starting up again. People cautiously returning to their meals. I remember Marcus pulling me close during our first dance, whispering, "That was brave," and kissing my shoulder. Some guests gave me tight-lipped smiles. Others avoided eye contact. But a few, mostly my friends and younger cousins, sought me out. They hugged me. One of them, my friend Mira, whispered, "You just said what half of us wish we had the courage to." I remember that clearly. My parents didn't say anything the rest of the night. My mother stayed seated with a glass of white wine, occasionally whispering to her sister. My father disappeared during dessert. Natalia later told me he'd gone to the parking lot to get some air. Darren? He left without saying goodbye. I saw him briefly near the exit, walking fast, his jaw tight. For some reason, that gave me closure I never thought I needed. But the thing that stuck with me wasn't what I said at the mic. It was the quiet shift that followed the feeling of having finally stopped pretending. We flew to Italy for our honeymoon the next morning. Rome, Florence, then a small villa in Tuscany. Marcus and I didn't talk about the wedding much. Not at first. We explored ruins, drank wine, made love in the middle of the afternoon with the windows open and the sun streaming in. We laughed a lot. It was the softest, safest joy I'd ever felt. But eventually, somewhere near the second week, it came up. We were on a shaded patio in Florence, eating grilled peaches and prosciutto, when Marcus said gently, "Do you regret what you said?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't regret it," I said finally. "But I do feel like something broke." He nodded. "Was it something that needed to break?" "Maybe," I said. "But it still hurts." That's the thing people don't tell you about standing up for yourself. It's not always this triumphant, glowing moment where everyone cheers and you walk away stronger. Sometimes, it's quiet. Lonely. Like you threw a stone through a stained glass window and everyone's too stunned to speak. Sometimes, the silence that follows honesty is worse than the lie you were living in. We got back to California a week later. The house was full of wedding gifts we hadn't opened. Cards with checks. Flower arrangements that were barely holding on. My inbox was full of congratulations and a few longer emails, mostly from friends of my parents, writing things like, "You really surprised us with that speech, but I suppose it's good you're speaking your truth. Your parents did a lot for the wedding. I hope you appreciate them despite the small seating oversight." Small seating oversight. That one got to me. I didn't respond. My parents didn't call right away. For 2 weeks, it was total radio silence. I tried to tell myself that was fine, that it was their job to reach out. But every time my phone buzzed and it wasn't them, I felt this pinch in my chest. I was grieving something, but I didn't know what yet. Not exactly. Maybe the loss of the version of my parents I'd tried to believe in. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I got a text from my mother. "When you have a minute, I'd like to talk. Just us. Just us." No apology. No context. But also, no accusations. I told Marcus, and he offered to come with me if I wanted. I said no. I met her at a small cafe near their neighborhood. The kind with fake plants in gold pots and overpriced lattes. She was already seated when I got there, her lipstick perfectly applied, her pearl earrings gleaming like she was going to a church function instead of a reckoning. We ordered coffee. She didn't say anything for the first few minutes. Finally, she said, "I didn't know you felt that way." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to say how could you not? But another part of me knew it wouldn't help. I said, "You've always made it very clear how you expect people to behave. I stopped showing feelings around you a long time ago." She looked away, blinking fast. "I thought I was teaching you to be strong," she said quietly. "You taught me to hide," I said. That landed somewhere. I could see it. She flinched slightly, then took a long sip of her drink. "I don't agree with how you did it," she said. "The speech. You embarrassed your father." "I was already embarrassed," I said. "That was the whole point." She nodded slowly. No apology. But not denial either. "We're not good at this," she said. "Feelings. Talking. But I'd like to try." I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. We didn't hug when we parted that afternoon. Just a nod. A quiet understanding that something had shifted, maybe not healed, not yet, but shifted. I walked back to my car slowly. The California sunlight was still strong, even in the late afternoon. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes before turning on the engine, just staring ahead, absorbing what had happened. No apologies. No clear resolutions. But also, no denial. That, in itself, felt like more than I ever thought I'd get. Marcus was on the couch when I got home, barefoot, reading with a blanket draped over him like he always did when he was relaxed. I dropped my keys in the dish and sat down beside him. He closed the book. She said she wants to try, I told him. He smiled a little. That sounds like progress. Maybe. Or maybe she just doesn't want to be the villain. Is there a difference? He asked gently. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure there was. The weeks that followed were weird. That's the best way I can describe them, just weird. My mom started texting me more. Not emotionally deep texts. Nothing personal. Just little things. A photo of her garden. A recipe she clipped from a magazine. One time, a blurry photo of my dad sitting in his recliner with the caption, "Same spot, different day." It was awkward, but it wasn't hostile. That was new. My father didn't reach out at all. Not even through her. He didn't so much as send a message acknowledging the wedding, the honeymoon, or anything I'd said. I expected it. I'd long since accepted that my dad was the kind of man who found silence more comfortable than confrontation. His entire emotional vocabulary consisted of one-word answers and grunts. Still, the quiet stung. I found myself questioning everything. Was I wrong to bring it up? Should I have handled it differently? Was the speech really the right place for it? Marcus told me, often, you didn't do anything wrong. And logically, I believed him. But emotionally? There were days I spiraled. I'd walk into the kitchen, open the fridge, and forget what I came in for. Then I'd just stand there, staring at the light and the rows of condiments, wondering how I ended up in this strange middle space between liberation and guilt. I started seeing a therapist again. An older woman named Joanne, who had this voice like warm honey and an office filled with plants and quietly ticking clocks. She never told me I was right. Never told me I was wrong. She just asked good questions. What would it look like, she asked once, if you stopped trying to be the daughter your parents wanted? I didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. But I was starting to wonder. Then came Thanksgiving. Marcus and I had already agreed we wouldn't travel that year. We wanted a quiet holiday, just the two of us, maybe a few friends, homemade pie, something low-key. The last thing I wanted was to be seated across from my parents again, pretending nothing had happened. But 2 weeks before the holiday, my mother called. Your father wants to invite you both for Thanksgiving, she said, without much emotion. I waited for more. For a please, or an acknowledgement, or even a reference to the elephant in the room. Nothing. I told her I'd think about it. Marcus raised an eyebrow when I told him. You want to go? He asked. I don't know, I said. Part of me wants to show up and be fine. Just to prove that I'm okay. That they didn't break me. And the other part? The other part wants to stay home and eat mashed potatoes in pajamas. He smiled. I vote for pajamas. But I didn't decide right away. I sat with it. I talked to Joanne. I journaled. I played out both versions in my head, one where we sat at the table and pretended everything was normal, and one where I reclaimed my peace without needing to be present for a performance. Both felt hard. Both felt like losses in their own way. But something strange happened that helped me decide. It was a Tuesday. I was at work, answering emails, when I got a message from Natalia, my cousin and maid of honor. It said, "Hey, I just had lunch with your mom. She told me she was proud of you." I blinked at the screen. What exactly did she say? I typed back. She said, Isla's strong. Stronger than I realized. I still don't agree with how she said it, but I can see she needed to. I sat back in my chair and let that settle. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. And maybe something was enough. I told Marcus I wanted to go to Thanksgiving after all. He didn't look thrilled, but he nodded. We go, we stay an hour, we leave if it gets weird. Deal, I said. I baked a pie from scratch apple, with a lattice crust. I wore a soft green sweater and jeans. Marcus wore a navy pullover that he said made him feel like a substitute teacher. We brought a bottle of wine and showed up at my parents' front door at 3 o'clock sharp. My mom opened the door. She looked surprised to see us, even though we'd said we were coming. Her eyes darted past me to Marcus, then back to me. Then she smiled tight but real. Come in, she said. My dad was in the kitchen, carving a turkey. He gave Marcus a handshake. He nodded at me. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied. And just like that, we were sitting at the same table again. The food was good. The conversation was shallow. Nobody brought up the wedding. Nobody mentioned the speech. But there was a quiet. Not the tense kind. Not the cold kind. The kind that maybe meant we were all thinking the same thing but no one wanted to go first. And yet, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like the start of something unfamiliar. Not reconciliation, exactly. But the slow, cautious tiptoeing around the idea that maybe just maybe we could be honest with each other in time. And honesty, I was learning, didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, it was just showing up without pretending. After Thanksgiving, the air between us remained neutral. Not warm, not cold, just somewhere in the middle. A ceasefire of sorts. There were no dramatic follow-up conversations. No sudden breakthroughs. But my mother texted a thank you for the pie the next day. She even added a heart emoji. That may sound trivial, but coming from her, it was practically Shakespearean. My father didn't say anything, of course, but I didn't expect him to. I'd long since accepted that the best-case scenario with him was passive presence. And on Thanksgiving, he'd stayed at the table, poured me a glass of wine, even asked Marcus a question about his job. That was enough of a gesture to register. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting more deeply, not just on my relationship with my parents, but on my own tendencies. My instinct to please. My need to anticipate emotional landmines before they could go off. I had built my whole identity around managing the moods of other people, especially my parents, and now I was trying to unlearn that at 36. Therapy helped. Joanne was gentle but persistent. She had this way of holding silence that made me fill it with things I didn't even know I needed to say. Like the time I told her I used to fake stomach aches in elementary school just so I could stay home and avoid disappointing teachers if I didn't do well on a test. Or how I used to rehearse conversations with Darren in the mirror, just to make sure I wouldn't cry if he got dismissive again. You've spent a long time managing other people's comfort, she said. Maybe it's time to start managing your own. It was a slow process. Some days, I'd feel strong, like I was finally peeling off this invisible layer I'd been hiding under for years. Other days, I'd cry over something stupid, like a memory of Darren sighing when I asked him to hold my hand in public, or my mother snatching a diary out of my hands when I was 13 because someone could find it. Marcus was always steady. He never rushed me. He never tried to cheer me up in the way that suggested I needed fixing. He just showed up over and over again with warmth, patience, and those quiet affirmations that still caught me off guard. You're allowed to take up space, he said once, while we were doing dishes. Even if it makes people uncomfortable. I still wasn't used to that kind of love. Around mid-January, I got a text from my dad. Just 4 words, you coming this Sunday? No punctuation. No details. I knew what it meant. Sunday dinners had been a thing in our family since I was a kid. We stopped doing them during the pandemic, then picked them up again afterward, but they'd never really been consistent since my divorce. And especially not after the wedding. I showed Marcus the message. Should we go? You tell me, he said. Do you want to go? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to reject the whole thing. To say, no, I'm not coming to sit around and pretend we're a happy little family with no baggage. But another part of me, the part that still clung to small gestures as signs of hope, wondered if maybe this was my father's version of an invitation. Or an apology. So we went. The house smelled the same as always: garlic, lemon, a hint of something roasting. My mom was in the kitchen, wearing her holiday apron even though it wasn't a holiday. My dad was at the stove, stirring a pot of tomato sauce with the TV playing low in the background. They didn't say much when we walked in, but they looked, not tense, just aware. Dinner was quiet at first. The table creaked like always. My mom passed around a basket of bread and reminded everyone, all four of us, to take it before it gets cold, like she always did. My dad offered Marcus a beer, which was a first. It wasn't until the plates were nearly cleared that my mom said, suddenly, I've been thinking about the wedding. I stopped mid-sip. Marcus froze beside me. I don't think I understood what you were trying to say at the time, she continued. But I've thought about it since. I may not agree with how it was said, but I heard it. And I'm trying to do better. That last sentence, "I'm trying to do better," hit me harder than I expected. Not because it fixed everything, but because it was the first time in my entire life that my mother acknowledged she might have contributed to my pain. I didn't rush to respond. I just nodded. Thank you, I said. Then my father added, almost as an afterthought, we didn't mean to hurt you. With the seat thing. It just didn't seem like a big deal at the time. It wasn't an apology. But it was the closest thing I'd ever get to one from him. Marcus reached for my hand under the table again. His grip was light, but steady. I appreciate you saying that, I said. It was a big deal to me. It's still something I'm working through. They didn't argue. They didn't deflect. We finished dessert in peace. After that night, something softened. Not everything changed overnight. They were still themselves, emotionally limited, awkward, sometimes obtuse, but they were also trying, in their own way. My mom started asking how I was feeling instead of just what I was doing. My dad actually called Marcus by his name instead of just your husband. There were bumps, of course. Moments when I felt the old pattern trying to pull me back in. Like when I mentioned going back to therapy and my mom said, still? With a tinge of judgment. Or when my dad rolled his eyes at something emotional I shared and muttered, overreacting again. But I didn't shrink the way I used to. I didn't swallow my feelings and smile. Instead, I responded calmly. That hurt, I said once, after my dad dismissed something I shared. He looked startled. Like it never occurred to him that words could land like punches. Sorry, he muttered. Progress. Meanwhile, Marcus and I were growing in ways I didn't expect. It's funny how clarity in one part of your life spills over into others. I started speaking up more at work. I set clearer boundaries with friends. I stopped saying yes when I wanted to say no. I cried less, but felt more. Not because I'd become less dramatic, but because I wasn't bottling everything until it burst. Marcus noticed. You're different, he said one night, as we lay in bed. Not like you've changed. More like, you've come back to yourself. I held his hand and whispered, thank you for seeing me. And I meant it. Spring came early that year. In California, spring is less about blooming and more about light, that soft, golden hour stretching longer into the evenings. Marcus and I had started taking evening walks after dinner, sometimes talking about nothing, sometimes about everything. One night in April, we were passing the small community vineyard near our neighborhood, not Napa, nothing fancy, just local soil and wild roses. And I told Marcus, I want to start something. He tilted his head. Something like, a project? No. Something real. Something that helps women like me. Women who've spent their lives being told they were too much, too emotional, too dramatic. I paused, then added, I want to build something I never had when I needed it. I started small. A private support group for women dealing with emotionally dismissive families or partners. We met twice a month at the local library, in a quiet conference room with free coffee and folding chairs. The first meeting had 3 women. The second had 7. By month 6, we had over 20 regular members, a mailing list, and requests from nearby towns to expand. We called it Not Too Much. Because how many times had we heard that phrase, like we were overflowing vessels that needed to be sealed shut? Marcus helped build the website. I filed for nonprofit status. We held workshops on setting boundaries, practicing assertiveness, handling family guilt. I was no therapist, and I made that clear. But I was proof that healing was possible, messy, slow, real healing. And here's where the satisfying part comes in. One afternoon, as I was setting up chairs for our 8th monthly workshop, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. Saw the piece about you in the local paper. Nice photo. I didn't know you'd started something. She was referring to the feature a journalist from a regional women's magazine had written, From Wedding Drama to Emotional Advocate, One Woman's Journey to Empower Others. My therapist had submitted my story, with my permission, as a profile pitch. I hadn't told my parents. I waited before replying. I debated writing something petty or biting some sarcastic remark like, guess I'm not just being dramatic anymore. But I didn't. Instead, I wrote, thank you. I hope it helps people who never felt heard. She didn't respond for a few days. Then, your father saw it too. He said you looked strong. I stared at that message for a long time. My dad, the man who once looked like he wanted to disappear every time I got teary-eyed, said I looked strong. That was my revenge. Not the cruel kind. Not even the loud kind. But the kind that grows quietly, roots deep, and proves that no matter who doubted you, you became everything they told you not to be. And not only did you survive, you thrived. Months later, something happened that truly marked the turning point. My mother invited me to speak at her women's church group. I nearly dropped my phone reading the text. I think they could learn something from you. About boundaries. You found a voice. I want them to hear it. It was the first time she didn't try to silence me, redirect me, or edit my story. She was inviting me to tell it, flaws, tears, fury, and all. I said yes. The night I stood at that podium in a modest church basement with folding chairs and pitchers of lemonade, I saw my mother sitting in the front row. Back straight. Hands folded. Eyes fixed on me. I told the truth about my marriage, my silence, my meltdown at my own wedding. I said, sometimes your parents won't be your safe place. And sometimes, it's not about fixing them, it's about freeing yourself. There was no gasp. No dramatic reaction. Just my mother, blinking back something I never thought I'd see. Pride. Real pride. Afterward, she came up to me. She didn't say much. Just pulled me in and whispered, you were never too much. I just didn't know how to handle what I never had. It wasn't revenge in the usual sense. But to me? It was better. Because the greatest revenge wasn't humiliation, or isolation, or cutting them out forever. It was showing them what they lost when they refused to see me. And then letting them watch as I rebuilt everything they tried to dismiss. Bigger. Bolder. Brighter. So yeah. My parents called me a drama queen on my wedding day. They invited my ex-husband to sit beside me, hoping I'd just smile and swallow it. Instead, I gave a speech that shook the room. Then I built something that outgrew all their expectations. Now? They come to my workshops. They hand out flyers. My mother bakes cookies for our weekend sessions. My dad even helped us set up folding tables once. And every time I see them there, quiet and listening while women tell their stories, I feel it again, that deep, satisfying click of poetic justice. The kind that doesn't need a spotlight. Just enough space to bloom.